It was November 9th, 2013. During a BlizzCon Q&A panel, the player mood was good, coming off the back of Mists of Pandaria, an expansion that had driven many players away due to its more whimsical and somewhat comical panda protagonists. Warlords of Draenor was soon to follow, bringing us back to those good old Warcraft roots of war, glory, and orcs. Lots of orcs. Hey, people seem to like it, I'm not judging. Well, at least they thought they would anyway. When a question along on the minds of many players who had soured towards the retail game and sought the nostalgia or community aspects of times past was posed directly to the top dogs at Blizzard for World of Warcraft.
Have you ever thought about adding servers for previous expansions as they were then?
No, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't.
A line that I'd bet very few people playing WoW these days would fail to recognise. Those 7 little words. You think you do, but you don't. This was J. Allen Brack answering, who was then the production director for WoW, later in 2014 becoming executive producer, and then finally succeeding Mike Morhaime as president at Blizzard in 2018. Fast forward a few years and as tech, dedication and player capabilities moved ever onwards, increasingly impressive servers emulating earlier versions of World of Warcraft really began to grow, and grow to levels unseen previously. That little phrase from Brack was being disproven by a substantial amount of players. This wasn't just a little niche of people wanting a small slice of nostalgia, it was literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, no exaggeration, hopping back onto legacy servers to play that version of the game that they remembered so well. Enter Nostalrius, the straw that broke the camel's back, the server that flew too close to the sun, the team that suffered from their success. This was the largest private server for World of Warcraft ever to have existed, so large in fact that it caught the ire of that which it beheld, Blizzard. And in an unprecedented action, Blizzard took legal recourse to issue a cease and desist order for violation against use of their IP, effectively forcing them to close their servers and for thousands of players to lose their beloved characters overnight. 800,000 accounts, 150,000 active accounts, over 3 million created characters, and a network of volunteers to keep this huge engine running. Gone. The community reaction was nothing short of groundbreaking. As Nostalrius wound down their servers for the final time on the 10th of April 2016, the impression that it left on the affected players was more than just a little bit apparent. Almost immediately, a petition was formed from the Nostalrius owners to Blizzard, stating that clearly the demand was there for a vanilla type of server, and if they were not prepared to allow another entity to run their IP, they should take on board the massive demand and just do it themselves. The support for this petition was completely overwhelming. Within a week of the petition being up, it had reached over 100,000 supporters. After 2 weeks, passing 200,000 in favour, support poured in as the movement gained widespread attention on every internet forum, discussion board and news site going. This all came to a head when finally, on April 26, barely 2 weeks after Nostalrius had been forced to close, Mark Kern himself, an ex-vanilla dev who also worked on the likes of D2 and earlier StarCraft games, took it upon himself to present the case, speaking directly to the Blizzard president, Mike Morhaime. Listen in here.
Hi Mike, what's up? As you may have heard, Nostalrius, the fan server you shut down, has a petition calling for legacy servers for World of Warcraft. I've got it right here. Over 230,000 signatures and thousands of comments. Nearly 10,000 pages in all. I've printed it all out because I thought it might be more tangible this way to see in physical form. I also have here a list of top Twitch streamers who have pledged their support to legacy servers and promise to start streaming WoW again if they return. That's a lot of gamers, and they all want one thing: to see vanilla and progression servers for WoW. I think it might be a good idea.
The petition ended up just shy of 280,000 votes in favour, with the whole internet crying out for classic. Surely this would be the point where something would turn. Well, as we now know, it was. At BlizzCon 2017, we wouldn't just have one new game announced for World of Warcraft, but a second. And at the very opening ceremony on the 3rd of November 2017, players worldwide gathered together to see what expansion would be following Warlords of Draenor. Instead, we got something that blew minds across the globe. Brack took to the stage once again, this time with a very different tone.
And I want to talk about ice cream. Ice cream is great. Ice cream is one of my favorite desserts. Personally, I love chocolate, but I understand that for some of you, your favorite flavor is vanilla.
And as the cinematic flashback through over a decade worth of content, everybody watching knew what this moment meant. That one moment where you see that dwarf above Ironforge with his loyal bear, the epic music playing in the background, it could only ever mean one thing. Blizzard were finally doing it. Classic WoW was going to be dream made reality. The aftermath of this announcement totally overshadowed many players' thoughts towards a new expansion. Instead of taking another step forwards, for Blizzard the best option was to take as many back as they possibly could. Forums flew on fire with comments, discussions, new personalities arose, experts were recognised, and an arms race began the very moment that Brack uttered the word vanilla. We needed more. Now that we had the confirmation that they were really going to make this happen, how will they do it? This is a very well-established developer when it comes to MMOs. If anyone could make this game work as it should have, surely Blizzard are the boys for the job. Things largely went quite quiet at Blizzard for some time, with gradual bits of information dropped in here and there, especially at BlizzCon 2018, when we got quite a bit more information about all the tech that's been going on in the background. And it was also around the time of late 2018 when we really started hearing info from Blizzard on how the game was going to happen and why they had made those decisions. Big decisions at that, using a 1.12 client for itemization and talents because it was the most complete version of Classic, rolling out content as a 6-phase setout, which had been moved up from 4 at an earlier date, primarily to address power gain from separate raids or dungeons being made available simultaneously, choosing to use 1.12 AV instead of earlier versions which had Korak the Blood Rager, making Snowfall Graveyard a big point of contention, landmines and reinforcements. And it was these three things that made AV the battleground that lasted days in the tales of old. Implementing layering to accommodate the massive initial demand of players. We'll talk more about layering later. Adding spell batching to aim to emulate spell interactions as they would have been back in 2004, as opposed to Blizzard's instant reactions for spells on their updated retail service. And as the initial beta tests rolled in, our noble heroes made their first footfalls back into Legend. I didn't get in until the open beta, and I remember just running about, capturing all the novelty of it over again, the masses of players, the random chats. It was really something to behold. Blizzard even gave us a glimpse of how they used to interact with players too, sending the final beta test off with a bang, spawning in raid bosses to mow down the poor unsuspecting masses of level 1s, lagging their way about the starting areas. The stage was set though, the beta tests concluded, systems tested, players ready, time off work booked. It was getting very, very close to crunch time. Classic WoW was due to launch on August 26, 2019 worldwide. And just 2 weeks before this was due to happen, something went wrong. Something that's turned out to be quite impossible to fix. On August 12th, Blizzard announced the name Reservation Day, so you can make sure you have your character ready to go day one. Alongside this, they provided the initial list of servers. Now let's have a little test. Can you tell me how many PvP servers there were for EU and NA literally days before the name Reservation? I'll give you a moment. Okay, had to think about it? Good, time's up. If you said 2 PvP servers for EU and 5 for NA, then you were right. In fact, NA had 12 realms total, and there were 7 European English-speaking realms total. 7. So, of course, the day to pick a name comes about, and almost immediately it turns out that PvP servers are packed beyond all recognition. Almost instantly, Blizzard were on the back foot trying to usher people out of packed realms, adding new PvP servers frantically in the days leading up to launch, as well as trying to do anything to try and get people to make the swap to a less populated server, but it was largely to no avail. People already had their character names or were on a server with their planned guild, and on top of that, everybody suspected a fairly fast player base fall-off, and that bigger is always better for servers, right? Deal with a queue now and secure a long-lasting healthy server down the line. No matter what Blizzard did, there were simply too few servers at the outset. Players' minds were made, and it was a very difficult job to drive players away from the seemingly inevitable queues. So be it, the players chanted. Queues? Sounds like my vanilla experience, others would say. And so with mere days left, we headed towards a momentous occasion, an almost once-in-a-lifetime experience on this scale. And on August 26, 2019, Classic World of Warcraft launched worldwide. And surely enough, that day came around, launch. A day that went quite differently for many players. I can say for myself, it went about as well as it could have really. I got straight in after a little bit of waiting around on the loading screen. It was about as busy as I expected it to be, but a few hours in, I was well on my way and had a nice, smooth 18-hour session before Blizzard decided that that was enough for me and kicked me off into a 20,000 player queue, which I took as a cue that it's nap time. Many servers worldwide, as Blizzard had been warning, ended up with enormous queues, 10,000 players, 15,000 players, some even regularly seeing 20,000 players, never mind just the 10 that Blizzard had been warning us about. Remember what Mark Kern said about Classic and Twitch? Yeah, he wasn't lying. Over 1 million concurrent viewers during launch. Every single internet personality hopped in to grab their piece of the classic pie, be it their first time or for nostalgia's sake. And well, let's just say having a stream open in this case didn't seem to give you too much preference over those who didn't for priority. But then again, it was all about the race. Who was going to be the first to cross the finish line, the first level 60, the first to douse the Fire Lord? And for many, both of these things came so much earlier than anybody could have reasonably predicted. The world first level 60 was done in about 79 hours playtime, and just more than a little bit of help from layering by Jokerd. He more or less single-handedly popularized AoE leveling for mages, which would go on to be seen in every single zone he had used for months and months to come. Not only did he have the foresight to level like this, but he also tactically left method early. Truly a visionary. Even more impressive though was Ragnaros going down 5 days after launch. This title was taken by the guild Apes from Gehennas. They had 15 players below level 60, hunters who couldn't even learn Trank Shot due to not being level 60 as well. And all of this happened 1 day after Jokerd got the world first 60. They had 35 guys at 60. And to achieve this, they've more or less locked themselves away in dungeons for days upon days, grinding and grinding out the levels. And of course they had to go and get the dowsers as well for Molten Core, and it was more than just a bit of a surprise when a stream randomly came on and suddenly Ragnaros was just dead. Felt like it came out of nowhere really. Oh, and of course they had enough players Elixir attuned to go straight to that afterwards and score their second world first in the same day. Needless to say, there was more than just a bit of surprise from, well, everybody that didn't involve themselves heavily in the private server scene. In less than 1 week, from character creation screen to clearing the first raid tier will always be insane. This also started people off questioning quite a bit. Maybe this isn't quite as hard as it was made out to be. Once again, we can chat about this soon. Regardless though, in the weeks following Classic's launch, its success was totally undeniable. Dominating Twitch, massive on YouTube, Blizzard's Q3 call evidencing the huge success that Classic had indeed proved to be, bringing hundreds of thousands of new returning players back to the game to see how it all began, more than doubling World of Warcraft's subscriber count overnight. Classic had clearly been for the best. Those first few weeks, perhaps even months you could say, were the honeymoon phase, Nothing was wrong, nothing could be wrong, until things started to wear a little bit thin around the edges, be it a recreation of an old MMO, players' attitudes towards gaming, whatever you want to say. Classic was far from immune to modern scrutiny. On top of this, several of the decisions that Blizzard made at a very early stage into Classic pre-launch had come back around to bite them hard. The game had proven successful initially, but would it have the legs to be a long-term success? You can try and take the game back to day one, but you can't really ever take the players there as well. Classic had the growing pains that you see with any MMO that hits it off to be larger than it was ever anticipated to be, though to some degree Blizzard were prepared for this eventuality. First up, layering, the classic answer to overcrowding in certain zones early on. This wasn't so much a bad decision to have. In fact, I think the game required it to be actually playable early on, given how totally overcrowded every single starting zone was. The premise of it was simple enough. Each realm can have a certain number of layers. Players were given a layer upon login and could change that layer by joining a group of a person on another one. This would split the player base up sufficiently to the point where quests are actually doable, and it's not just constantly looking something like this. Many players weren't exactly overly happy about it being around for so long regardless, stating it's having negative economical effects. And then it was found you could effectively layer and reset raids, and well, that was about quite enough for most. The thing about layering is that it was intended for use for a couple of weeks, maybe a month, certainly not past phase 1, but it turns out things didn't really quite work out that way in the end. Layering was kept around for about as long as it possibly could be before each realm was dropped onto one layer just before the start of phase 2, aka the World PvP phase, which in of itself caused a pretty large player drop-off due to the near impossibility of actually playing the game without becoming a walking bag of honor points for the opposing faction. In time, layers would once again return to WoW at the height of summer to combat queues that the larger servers faced. And layers were answers to people just not being willing to swap servers at the end of the day. Blizzard had attempted prior on a number of occasions to open up free transfers, but they ended up doing more harm than good. Entire guilds sweeping up and leaving overnight to go to greener pastures. Just like many other things in Classic being so player driven, more often than not, many different guilds would all communicate and agree to all move at once off a server. And with free transfers opening quite literally at the start of phase 2, when on faction dominated PvP servers you would, no exaggeration, get camped in your faction capitals, people just up and left. Entire faction populations evaporated overnight. Just look over to what happened to the Alliance population on Flamelash EU, one of the most notorious mass exoduses to be seen in Classic. After the Alliance were camped in Ironforge day in, day out for honor, near the whole server picked up sticks and took those transfers away. Some Horde players saw that as winning the war, but never having any World PvP ever again doesn't quite seem like a good reward to me. The content pacing itself was criticised too, with large deviations from the original 6-phase plan happening. We've had more than just 1.5 phase come out, Diamol arriving before the rest of phase 2 on October 15th, phase 2 itself subsequently came on November 12th, and then Battlegrounds, which were due to come out with phase 3, being rushed out early to put an end to the honor grinding in phase 2, just within a month of the actual PvP patch itself. It does feel though at this point now we've gotten on track a bit more, it feels about right, for me at least. 1 year in though, and the gates for AQ just having been opened, might seem a little bit on the speedy side, but at the rate players go through content these days, I think it's been for the best overall. And then there's just been the changes themselves that have been required throughout the duration of Classic. Removal of battleground portals, making the backdoor jumps impossible in AV, trying to stop pre-mades in AV, Black Lotus spawn rate changes, breaking certain macros or add-ons. I think we've seen quite a swap in community opinion from purely no changes to actually the game would be better if certain changes were put in. It's been quite a wall to try and break down actually. I think Classic could have been even better if this were the case from early on. But this has been more of a learning point, and we'll have to see how this carries over to TBC one day, I imagine. Though Classic was far from perfect, it offered that MMORPG feeling that so many felt had been gradually eroded away from other titles that they enjoyed. At its core, it's a social game where community interactions are very much needed, as well as frankly being very casual friendly. Even back during when vanilla was actually released itself, it was considered an MMO that catered towards a casual player. Crazy, I know. Other MMOs had you lose XP, items or progress when you die, for instance. WoW, you lose time. Time is that one big factor that makes everything turn around and happen in World of Warcraft. And so players will seek out ways to mitigate that, to learn the best strategies to get the most out of their time. And from that idea, there is and always will be the most effective tactics available. And with each patch moving onwards, it became more and more apparent that it's not just the guilds at the top end steamrolling through the content. Between the massive amount of available information online on the best way to set up your character, your talents and your gear, information on boss mechanics, if any, add-ons to help your performance and logs to measure how well you do among your peers, as well as years and years of experience that many players bring to the table against this content. Well, any illusion that Classic was going to be the hardcore experience that only the select few would get to see through fully has been more or less fully dispelled at this point, much like a world buff. And I'd say it's not only just because of our gear, or talents, or knowledge. The bosses are just really simple. Many fights come down to, can your DPS look at a threat meter and not overtake the tank? You could honestly double or triple the health of the majority of the bosses in Classic so far, and without changing anything mechanically, it would just tax your players on consumables, especially the healers, a little bit more. There's just a lot of big dumb target dummies that drop nice purple items. Seeing the meta form for Classic over time has been a little bit strange, actually. I did a video about a week after Blackwing Lure was released on how many people were gatekeeping others being good or bad, as was very much expected. But it wasn't just the speedrunners at the top end doing it. A lot of the more casual crowd was criticising those who felt the need to pick up world buffs or consumables to enable them to blast through raids in no time at all, or that people AoE grinding for levels aren't playing the game in the way that it's intended either. I think you just have to accept that everyone wants something different, and in many ways you can get that out of Classic, and that can only ever be a good thing, really. The side of the meta that has really become so evidently widespread is the rampant use of consumables and world buffs to aid performance in raids, as well as the insistence that to some degree they are required. Here's a word or two from ex-vanilla dev Kevin Jordan on world buffs.
So the original idea was there was no oversight for it. It was just a bunch of dudes making content that was cool. So a bunch of people working independently, putting in stuff like that because it was a cool way to reward you for a quest or an activity.
I guess in some way this is part of the charm of Classic in a way. Things were just made because it sounds cool, really, only for 16 years later for literally hundreds of players to stack up in capitals to get these buffs for raid time. I even started using them for leveling on some of my characters at this point because they're just such a great boost to performance. There have been a lot of players who have really grown to resent world buffs and consumables as part of a meta that's needed. The requirement to wait around and collect buffs and to farm gold for potions that just make the raids easier than they already are, up to the point where they quit or just flat out refuse to play into it anymore. I think it's important to keep in mind that you have a choice to pick your guild, and your aspirations for performance in raids should match what they expect of you. That's why speedrun guilds have every buff under the sun stacked up pretty much every single raid. There are also zero buff guilds that just want a decent raid without all the extracurricular work that comes with it. Regardless of stacking buffs and consumables or not, playing into the meta or not, Classic has for sure been easier than expected overall thus far, and I don't doubt that it will continue to do so for the remainder of it and whatever comes next. And here we are, today, 1 year of Classic. How it's been a year already, I have no idea. That's been 1 year on YouTube full time for me too, actually, as of a few days ago. That's pretty cool. I know sometimes I'm quite critical of Classic, that's for sure. I do see the comments, how I change opinions on things, and I apparently used to be a Classic fanboy and now I'm a hater, and so on, but at the end of the day, I'd like to have a fun game, and hopefully I can say some things that will help to that end. It's because if I believe something is somewhat imaginable, I'd like to present how things could be, not lay them off as entirely impossible, unless I truly believe that to be the case. Though I may come off as a bit ranty sometimes, I do try to temper that edge. After all, I do raid actively on 2 characters, have nearly 8 classes at level 60, without boosting ever. I'm the proud owner of a T-Boost Blazing Longsword, and have written a total of about 400,000 words about Classic WoW over the past year or so, and that's a little over 2/3 of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Weird flex, I know, but yeah, I do quite like the game, you could say. And here we are, just entering Phase 5. Many servers are still in the process of getting those gates open to bash some bugs on the head, and the legacy of Naxxramas stands ominously on the horizon. Though I'm not expecting anywhere near the grueling task that the Frontiermen in Vanilla had, I'm sure looking forwards to it, as well as getting that sweet tier 3. I know I've missed a few bits out in the video here, I didn't want it to go on forever and ever, stuff like the botting side of things, which I often like to cover, a bit more information on PvP or the Scarab Lord dramas. I think that's all quite fresh or still ongoing for some servers at this point. The list could really go on and on and on, so I had to pick and choose a little bit. When all is said and done with Classic, don't you worry, there will be a full review on the whole entire saga from me. Despite some of the expectations of difficulty being shattered, it's still a game I love to play, day in, day out. But there will come a day when Kel'Thuzad has fallen, a day when tier 3 is as common as a Thunder Fury at the moment. That day will present that moment so many people have leveled characters for. That journey into the next step. Crossing the threshold of the Dark Portal into a savage, new, alien world. I don't know when that day will come, but I am as eager in anticipation as anybody. What does the future hold?
You are not prepared.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. It's a bit of a special video, so I thought for once, why not actually appear on camera so you can, get a good look at this. I did take a bit longer with the video in terms of putting everything together, not just the video length, but the editing and so on, so hopefully that did show and you liked the video. It's probably my favourite thing that I put together so far. And like I mentioned in the video, I have been doing YouTube for about a year now total, which is crazy to think not just that long's gone by in Classic, but for me as well. So I just want to pop on and say thanks to all of you for allowing me to do this, really. It's been pretty good, if I had to give it a particular rating. Oh, and you know that thing YouTubers do where they make a really long video and then at the end they're like, oh, leave a comment saying, can't wait for Warlords of Draenor Classic. Do that just to confuse people. Oh, also, yes, I am Ginger. I'll see you in the next video very soon.